Hey there guys, today we're going to be taking a look at 25 different games running on the Beelink SER6 Max. This is a Ryzen 7 based system. We are rocking a Ryzen 7 7735HS. Don't let the 7000 series fool you there. This is actually just a refresh of a 6000 series APU. That being the 6800H. It does come with some minor improvements in terms of CPU clock speed, but nothing that is actually going to make a meaningful difference overall. And what that overall means to the actual performance is that it's still going to be a monumental leap over the 5000 series, but don't go thinking that this is somehow going to be comparable to the Zen 4 based Ryzen 7000 series APUs. So think like the 7840HS and the 7940HS. These are running on a brand new architecture and a brand new GPU architecture. But of course they are priced noticeably higher than this, with the cheapest variant being the SER7, and that being an extra $200 on top of this system that we're looking at right now. And that of course does come with a pretty massive disclaimer of that at that point you're really getting into the price point where you should just be considering either picking up a full gaming desktop if gaming really matters to you, or just a desktop in general, since if the CPU really matters to you, going with a desktop CPU is going to net you better performance. Or you should really just be considering a laptop. The SER7 is kind of in an odd place right now in terms of price. So right now I think that the SER6 Max is about the maximum that you should really go with a mini PC, unless you have very specific reasons to go with a mini PC. But let's take a look at how it actually performs in 25 different games. Of course, this is going to be just a test of the iGPU, not necessarily the CPU. If you want to see CPU comparisons, you're going to have to wait until we compare this directly with the SER5 Max and all the other mini PCs that I have. That is going to be coming in the full review. Be sure to subscribe for that. But let's jump on in. All right, so to start off the gaming testing on the SER6 Max, here we have Starfield running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the performance preset. I was very excited to see how this game would actually perform on this system, and so far I'm actually pretty impressed with the results that we're getting here. Now, the 1% lows certainly aren't remarkable, but this is the most playable experience that we've ever gotten out of a system with an iGPU. And overall, I was just impressed that I was actually able to play the game. Would I realistically play like this? I don't know. It's kind of a tough sell. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this game in particular. I love Bethesda games, but this one just had a little bit too much of a boring world, along with some very boring gameplay that made it very hard to actually sit down and play this for an extended period of time. That being said though, of all the iGPUs, this is again the best performance that I've gotten out of any system, and now I'm very curious to see what RDNA 3 can do with this game. But all in all, I think this is a pretty impressive result, though I still would not necessarily recommend playing the game on this system like this. Now, the next game that I wanted to take a look at is one that I personally really enjoy. It's pretty much within the genre of games that I personally really like, and that being co-op first-person shooters. And at the lowest in-game graphics settings, with the FSR settings set to the performance preset, the level of performance that we get out of this is remarkable. Pretty much fully able to take advantage of the 240 hertz display that I have right next to me, and with the abundance of USB-C ports on this system, with one USB-C to DisplayPort cable, I'm pretty much able to run a 240 hertz display at 1080p perfectly fine and still be able to plug in all my peripherals and everything else that I would want to hook up to this, thanks to all that USB-C. So overall, really impressive levels of performance. Now, the reason that we tested with the lowest in-game graphics settings and not something higher is because every other system that I'd taken a look at, I have used the lowest in-game graphics settings in practically every game. This is the first APU where I genuinely feel like the lowest in-game graphics settings is not the only option that you have in a lot of titles. Obviously, with the Vega-based iGPUs, there were a lot of older AAA titles that you could pretty much play at higher than lowest graphics settings, but this is going to be able to do that in more recent titles. Now, we're only taking a look at 25 games this time around. There's going to be a good variety of different titles to look at here, but this is not all of the testing I'm going to be doing with this system. So if you'd want to see an even bigger list of games being tested with absolutely no repeats with this, let me know down below if you want to see a 50 game comparison. Again, no repeats of these games here. So it will be 50 brand new different titles tested on here. Let me know down below if you want to see that. But of course, games like Deep Rock Galactic aren't the only things that will run on here. Here we have one of the most popular games in the world. We have Counter-Strike 2. Of course, we are just doing a bot match because the game itself does not let you use MSI Afterburner's overlay with trusted mode enabled, which means I really can't do any multiplayer. But as you can see, the performance that we're getting here in this bot match is pretty incredible. The 1% lows look amazing. The FPS average is spectacular. So this system will pair really, really well with a 144 Hz display. And in all honesty, this is pretty impressive. Now, of course, we are using the lowest in-game graphics settings and we are using FSR again, but this time it's FSR set to the ultra quality mode, which means it's just a free performance uplift unless you are just extremely CPU bound. But this is, of course, the perfect type of title to play on a system like this because you're going to be able to get some fantastic levels of performance, and again, in one of the most popular gaming title in the world right now. Now, with the last two games, I got really excited with the level of performance that we were getting, and even Starfield impressed me, so I decided to take a look at another 2013 title that was released earlier in the year, pretty much at the beginning of the year. And here we have Dead Space, the remake. And while the FPS average that we got throughout the gaming experience was pretty rock solid, there were consistent stutters throughout the gaming experience. Every time I would wander into a new area, my 1% lows would pretty much tank into a single digit. And you'll see that as I'm looking around, there will be a lot of moments of just straight up freezing and stuttering. And you'll see that the frame time charts are all over the place. This is not a great gaming experience. Visually speaking, it looks great even with FSR set to the performance preset, but overall the level of performance that I was getting out of this meant that the actual experience of playing it was just not great. In the areas we're going to be sticking around for a while, it's perfectly fine, but as soon as we start to wander around and go from room to room, the performance will really start to tank, and this is a consistent experience throughout multiple hours of playing. Now, of course, we're going to be taking a look at Apex Legends running here at the lowest in-game graphics settings. The game does not support any upscaling whatsoever, so it is the full 1080p resolution. One thing I do want to mention, though, is that this is footage from the first run of the game that I actually ended up doing for the day. I usually end up testing with 3 runs on every single game. I say usually because sometimes I do need to do more than that if one of the results gives some outlier results. This time around, while testing this specific system, I did actually end up having to throw away usually my first run. This right here is the first run that I did with Apex Legends, and I wanted to show you why exactly I was throwing out the first run for most games. The first run for most games would pretty much involve just shaders being cached, so the performance would be noticeably worse, specifically in 1% lows, than most other titles. But specifically for this game, once I did the other 3 runs, the 1% lows and the FPS average were a lot more accurate. And overall, this is the best result that I've ever gotten out of an APU, and it genuinely actually makes this a lot more enjoyable and playable of an experience, even though this is not really a particular game that I enjoy. And speaking of games I don't particularly enjoy, here we have Halo Infinite running with the campaign. We are running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, but we also do have dynamic resolution disabled, so we are at 100% 1080p here. If you're actually playing the game itself, I would recommend just turning on dynamic resolution scaling and setting a target to about 60 FPS. It's going to make the experience the most enjoyable because that should eliminate most of the dips that will end up happening below 60. Overall, though, this was a very playable experience, though not a high refresh rate one, but it really didn't need to be. At least while playing the campaign, this was more than adequate, but again, I do recommend turning on dynamic resolution scaling. Overall, though, I had very little to complain about, except for the fact that I am just not the biggest Halo Infinite fan. Certainly not the worst game in the world, but outside of the first few weeks that I was out, I really just have not found myself coming back to this game at all, really. Now, I did want to check it out in one of the games that impressed me the most this year, and that is Lies of P. You can see her here running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and of course, as per usual, we are using FSR, though it's FSR at the performance preset. FSR really seems to push these RDNA 2 based iGPUs into a level where they actually become a lot more usable in modern titles. Here, the level of performance that we were getting was actually pretty impressive, though we were still seeing the issues with the frame times that we've seen with the other APUs because of the overall higher FPS average and 1% lows. It meant that fluctuation just didn't bother us as much. but it was definitely still present there. But an overall improvement and far more playable than the Vega-based iGPUs. Now, another big release that came out this year was, of course, Battlebit Remastered, one of the newer titles that I've played the most this year just because of the sheer fun gameplay of it all. And of course, part of what makes that gameplay so great is the fact that it runs buttery smooth on pretty much any system. Here you can see it running on the SER6 Max at the potato graphics settings, which is exactly what I play on my desktop itself. And that is, of course, with an RTX 3070 Ti. The main reason that I do that is because I am trying to just maximize my performance, and visually speaking, I don't think there's anything you could really do to make this look that much better, or at least not without making it just more difficult to see the enemies at a distance. But like this, the 1% lows and FPS average are so good that we're able to take full advantage of pretty much any high refresh rate display out there and still get a lot of use out of it. But of course, continuing on to look at games that run absolutely perfectly on here, we do have Valorant. Again, I'm showing you the first game's 1% lows here just so that you can see what it's like when I play the very first game that I do for testing. This is another one that didn't get included because those 1% lows were kind of an outlier in comparison. In general, Valorant is one of those titles that is very difficult to test because of the fact that you can't really pick the map you're going to be playing on, and there's a lot of variables involved depending on the specific map and abilities being used and such. But on a 3-game average, both our 1% lows and FPS average were looking absolutely remarkable, though I do wish that those 1% lows were a little bit lower going into the triple digits. There's very little for me to complain about here. Now, another game that I really wanted to take a look at was Fallout 4 running on here. Once I saw Starfield running as well as it did, I was pretty excited to take a look at Fallout 4 because it might actually have the headroom here for us to start doing some graphics tweaking and even some graphics mod installment. So I was pleasantly surprised to see the game running at the lowest in-game graphics settings. We are getting above 60 FPS average, with our 1% lows being pretty much at 60 FPS, which means that we are going to have a rock solid experience. We might actually have the headroom to start to turn up some graphics settings. We'll take a look at this game individually running on this system in another video, where we're also going to install some graphics mods and see just how far we can get with these integrated graphics. Now, another slightly older title that I wanted to take a look at, and I say slightly older even though I'm lying to myself. Yes, it does actually hurt me deep in my soul to know that this game is almost a decade old at this point, but it's still an absolutely fun game to play, and at the lowest in-game graphics settings, we're getting some pretty impressive FPS averages, and our 1% lows are looking really nice. Overall, I found this to be a very enjoyable experience, and an absolutely great result in a fantastic game that you could still pick up to this day and have a blast with, especially if the price of the second game, and of course a lot of the story directions that they decided to do, as well as gameplay changes in Dying Light 2, might just not be for you. At least Dying Light 1 is very playable on here. Of course, another great game that I wanted to see running on here is Doom 2016, an absolute gem of a game, and of course taking a look at Vulkan running on this system right now. The game seems to always want to default to OpenGL, and I would always recommend just switching to Vulkan, since Vulkan seems to run just significantly better on pretty much all modern systems. Overall, the performance that we were getting here at the lowest in-game graphics settings is good enough that we could realistically start to think about turning up the graphics settings, or you could be a real gamer and just enjoy the higher FPS in Doom. All in all, it's an absolutely fantastic result, and what is going to be the trend throughout this video is just seeing some of these games perform the absolute best that they ever did with integrated graphics. And it's not just the fact that it is the best iGPU experience, it's the fact that it is in a lot of ways just so good that you won't even think about the fact that you're playing this on an iGPU. Now, of course, we've taken a look at Assassin's Creed Mirage running on this system before, even getting its own standalone video comparing it to the SER5 Max and the SER5. But here in this video, you can see the level of performance that we get at the lowest in-game graphics settings. And again, FSR just really seems to pair really well with these RDNA 2 based iGPUs, because at the performance preset, we're getting an almost 60 FPS average, and our 1% lows are looking remarkable, which means this game is actually going to be completely playable on a brand new iGPU system here. This is great to see because this is more than twice the performance that we were getting out of the SER5 Max. Now the SER5 Max is at the edge of playability, while this is pretty much at the edge of a fantastic experience. Now a brand new title that ended up disappointing me in terms of its performance is Forza Motorsports. You're running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, though the game really wants to automatically handle everything, and I pretty much just let it do it with a target of the highest FPS possible, and our 1% lows were really the biggest disappointment here, less so the FPS average. The experience of actually playing the game is fine enough, but it's certainly not going to be remarkable. Now taking it back to a classic title, here we have BioShock Infinite running with the Ultra Graphics preset. Now in all the other systems that I've taken a look at this game running on there, I have used the very high graphics preset, not the Ultra Graphics preset. Reason being is that Ultra really impacts your FPS for pretty much no visual difference whatsoever. I decided to use Ultra just to see what this system could really do on this game, and we're getting some really impressive results that are doing even better than a lot of iGPU systems that we've taken a look at that are running this game at a lower graphics setting. So we're able to actually max this game out and get the best performance we've ever seen on here with an iGPU, and that is really nice to see. Now moving on to Batman Arkham Knight, here you can see we're running with the lowest in-game graphics settings. We are at 1080p full resolution since the game does not have FSR or anything like that, and we're able to get some great results for both our FPS average and our 1% lows. Again, this is a generational leap forward going from Vega-based iGPUs to RDNA-based iGPUs here, where this legitimately feels like a next-gen upgrade over the SER5 Max in terms of how it performed in this game. Now, a very common title that I test all the time is Grid 2. It is quite a few years old at this point, but it does have a built-in benchmark, and graphically speaking, it still looks really, really nice as a game. I normally also will test this at the very high graphics settings because Ultra really doesn't give you any real benefits, and it tends to impact the performance a lot on these lower-end iGPUs. But as you can see in this one, we're able to actually use the full Ultra graphics preset and still get some amazing 1% lows and amazing averages. So if you're looking at maxing out older titles, this is pretty much the perfect system for it. And that should give you kind of some ideas of what the emulation performance is going to be like for a system like this. But of course, we will take a look at emulation in its own standalone video as well. Now moving on to Mafia II, the definitive edition, that being the remaster of an absolutely classic game. Here we are running it with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and again, the first run, which I am showing you the first run just so that you can understand how consistent this was a problem, where when I would first test out a game, those 1% lows would look brutal, but every other test after that, it would look perfectly fine. I want you to understand this because of the fact that when you get this system and you try to play some games, you might crash the desktop the first time you try to launch it, or you might end up just having inconsistency issues the first time you're playing through the game. This is a very common thing, especially with these iGPUs. If a game has a built-in benchmark, let that run once or twice, or if you're starting a brand new game, just play through the tutorial segment just once. It doesn't have to be every game, especially older titles, but in a lot of titles you might end up that being the case, and that will actually help boost your performance overall. But Mafia II, the definitive edition, did run really well after multiple passes on here, to the point where I'm actually really happy with the game's result on here. Now, another built-in benchmark that actually ended up really impressing me with its result is Deus Ex: Mankind Divided. Here you see it running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, but the 1% lows and FPS average that we're getting is actually really remarkable, and it's some of the best results that we've pretty much ever seen. And it is the first time with an iGPU that I would legitimately say that this game is actually playable on here. Systems like the 5500U and even the 5800H aren't exactly going to give you a really great experience in this title, to the point where you realistically were not going to be playing this on here. You can actually play this game on here and you're actually going to get a great time with it. Yes, visually speaking, you're still making a lot of sacrifices since it is the lower in-game graphics, but you are getting some great FPS to go along with that. That being said, I would actually recommend maybe messing around with injecting FSR into this game, like running the game at a native 720p and then upscaling that with an FSR injector to 1080p to see if you could actually boost your performance and maybe give you enough headroom to actually turn up the graphics settings if you wanted to. But honestly, this is still perfectly perfectly fine for a lot of people. Now, another title that I like to frequently test is Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord, one of my absolutely favorite games of all time. We are running this at the lowest in-game graphics settings, but of course the game does not support FSR, so no upscaling is being applied. The game does support DLSS, but of course if you don't have NVIDIA, you cannot use that. But luckily, it's really not necessary. With this specific chip, we're actually now in the territory where we could consider turning up graphics settings. While this is some really nice levels of performance, and it does give you headroom for those moments where you're getting into really big battles with a lot of things happening in them, this is already simulating a pretty large battle. And as you can see, the performance that we're getting here is really nice to the point where you could actually maybe consider turning on shadows and other things like that. But we'll be doing a deep dive later on to just see what kind of graphical improvements we can actually see in games while maintaining the same level of performance as something like the SER5 Max. So stay tuned for that. I know I'm announcing a lot of videos coming up, but the SER6 Max has just been that exciting of a system. Another frequent tested game here is of course Alien Isolation, one of my favorite games to test just because of the fact that it looks absolutely gorgeous. It is in one of my favorite franchises of all time, and the level of performance that we get on these iGPUs is really, really impressive. Here, both the 1% lows and the FPS average look really, really nice to the point where we could actually consider even turning up the resolution. We are at the full 1080p resolution. We are already at the ultra graphics. There's not really much room to improve here outside of just turning up the resolution, and we might just be able to do 1440p here. That might be interesting to try out. But overall, I'm really happy with the results here. Now, the next title I wanted to take a look at is, of course, Ready or Not. Really, the reason I decided to take a look at this game was just because I got very curious to see if it would actually be playable on here, because we've gotten very, very close on other iGPU systems. We are using the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the performance preset. The result here was actually pretty impressive. You will see spikes in those 1% lows here and there. Specifically, rather, it's the frame times that you're going to see spiking, and you're going to see those 1% lows start to fluctuate here and there. But overall, especially after multiple playthroughs, the game really just felt fantastic to play. I was really, really impressed. Of course, we are using FSR at the performance preset, so it doesn't look remarkable, but it's just so playable here where you can actually start to consider turning up the FSR quality so that you can improve the visuals a bit there. One of the games that also really impressed me, of course, is Spider-Man Miles Morales. You can see it running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the performance preset. And this was actually my first time playing any of the Spider-Man games with a mouse and keyboard, and my oh my, does this feel awful to play. But I just could not find my Xbox controller, so I pretty much had to power through like this. Luckily, the system was helping me out tremendously by actually giving us a pretty decent frame rate, and look at those frame times. Besides the occasional spike here and there, which seemed to be present in this game no matter what system I play it on, it's still very, very smooth and very consistent, and pretty much the most enjoyable time I've ever had in this franchise on an iGPU. And it's to the point where if you have one of these systems, or just a system with this specific chip, you're a lot less limited in the types of titles that you can actually play, and that has really impressed me so far. Of course, I told you that a lot of the types of games that I like to play are co-op shooters, and one of them is Killing Floor 2. I don't play this game anywhere near as much as I used to, but it is still a really fun game to jump into and play, and visually speaking, I think it still looks pretty decent. And overall, the performance here was fantastic. The thing that I'm learning a lot is that, especially for a lot of titles that are around 5 years plus, you have a lot of headroom to actually start messing around with graphics settings. Now, most of these games that you're looking at here are going to be running at the lowest in-game graphics settings. That's pretty much to be expected because that's what I test all iGPUs with. This is the one that has finally bucked the trend there, and we can actually start to look at different configurations. So as we dive deeper into this specific system, just know that I will be testing out different graphical configurations, but I will also always give you the lowest in-game graphics settings for you people that want to maximize your performance, because you are my kin. We are one. Now, another title that I have really enjoyed playing over the last few months has been Warhammer 40k Darktide. I feel like this is such an underrated game. I don't hear people really talk about it all that much, and I don't understand how. It's so much fun. If you have been looking for a Left 4 Dead alternative, because Left 4 Dead 3 pretty much only exists in all of our collective imaginations, well, this exists. If you love 40k and you love Left 4 Dead, this is pretty much it, especially because the overhaul update that recently came out actually made a lot of these classes really fun to play. If you did not enjoy the game when it first came out, I completely understand. I was kind of with you on that. I couldn't play more than 1 or 2 missions without getting bored pretty much. But with the new talent tree, this is really, really fun to play. Now, on this specific system, the 1% lows were a little disappointing to see, but our FPS average was still great, and overall, it was a very enjoyable experience. It was another one of those titles, though, where when you first start playing it, the 1% lows look absolutely abysmal, but every other run after that actually ended up being really, really great, though still not as high as I would like it to go. And that is all 25 games running on the SER6 Max. We took a wide variety of different titles from all across the different years, different genres, just to kind of paint an overall picture of what it's like to actually use this system, and my god, am I impressed. I knew RDNA 2 was going to be a massive leap over Vega, but this has been actually substantial levels of performance increase in a lot of these titles, pushing a lot of these titles from the edge of playability to just straight up unplayable to actually a playable experience, or even going as far as to being a high FPS experience. Going from the SER5 Max, in certain titles, you're going to go from not even really being able to play it comfortably to being able to get essentially a 60 FPS average. Now, that's not every title, and there's still going to be a lot of things out there that will give you problems. Don't think that this is some catch-all solution that is going to fix every issue humanly possible, but it's not about that. If you're looking to do gaming, and it just has to be on a mini PC and you're on a very specific budget, this really, really does a remarkable job. But we're already getting into a price point where you should really start to consider just making your own desktop PC. If you don't have the room for a full tower, then this is a good alternative, but only if you don't actually plan on ever making an ITX system, which ITX does come with a premium, so I can completely understand, and if having a full tower or MITX gaming system is just going to take up too much space. I know there's a lot of people out there that have very limited space. You might have siblings or roommates where you can't exactly have a full desk with a full tower setup, but maybe having a little system like this that you can even mount onto the back of a monitor itself, it might just be what you need to be able to game. I really love this system. We're going to be diving in for a full review soon, as well as, of course, doing more different video testing like this and comparison videos. There's going to be a lot of content of the SER6 Max coming up, as well as SER5 Max. Those two systems really have just become my main obsessions right now, so stay tuned for a lot of that. But I really, really love this system so far. If you would like to pick one up yourself, you can, of course, check out the links down below. I'll catch you guys in the next one.